mean, oftentimes dragons in East Asian folklore mythology are gentle creatures, although this one seems to be kind of pissed off. I mean, it reminds me of, again, Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki films, things like Castle in the Sky kind of have this very evocative steampunk aesthetic. The costumes, a little bit more colorful than we would have seen historically, but definitely rooted in traditional East Asian fashions. Hi, gamologists. We're going to look at Wild Hearts today. My name is Michael Crandol. I'm a professor of Japanese studies at Leiden University in the Netherlands, where I teach classes on Japanese ghosts and monsters and horror film and all that kind of fun stuff. I'm really excited to be here today to take a look at these games with you, so we'll jump right in. Looks like we've got kind of a traveling biwa hoshi monk of some sort. So he's got the biwa, which is the traditional Japanese instrument there. The colors are a bit garish, I think, for maybe being historically accurate, but the ears on top are kind of interesting too. It's this almost this weird mix of kind of historically accurate on one hand, but cosplayish on the other.
Not a regular hunter, that's for sure.
I don't think there's a ton of significance to these. I mean, it's very typical kind of, the straw hat and so forth for traveling in the rain. But this is very typical imagery from not necessarily history, but the history of kind of samurai film. These are images that would be familiar to anyone who's seen kind of Japanese samurai or ninja films. So it seems to be maybe hearkening more on kind of that tradition a bit, perhaps.
Where are we?
There's some wild hair colors there, too. That is interesting. That actually reminds me a lot of the Studio Ghibli film, Princess Mononoke, with the possessed boar god. That's probably a conscious illusion there. There's this idea that when you have these animals that become kind of possessed from rage or anger or injustice or something of that nature, it causes them to kind of grow monstrous and so forth. Princess Mononoke, of course, was a huge film in Japan. Everybody went and saw it. Well, again, this is a very kind of fantasized evocation of feudal Japan. So the architecture, vaguely Japanese, but also we have this kind of skyscraper Ewok village up in the sky, kind of not necessarily historically accurate, but I don't think that's what they're intending. All right, so once again, we've got kind of this is a wolf, right, that's grown to enormous size. So again, this seems rooted in this idea that intense feelings, anger, rage, and so forth have the power to turn things monstrous. I think the creatures in this game are called kemono, which is just kind of the Japanese word for beast. But that's also the same character that's used to write the word kaiju, which is the word for giant monsters like Godzilla. So there's probably an allusion there as well. Kemono is also probably going to make people think of the word bakemono, which is the word for monster. Once again, it seems like we've got an animal grown to enormous size. And another thing that this might be kind of playing off of is this belief in Japan, traditional Japanese folklore, that animals that are really old gain magical powers and can kind of take on abilities. We see this a lot with like this idea that foxes that live a long time grow extra tails. So I think maybe we're seeing this idea here as well, right, that these long-lived animals gain magical properties, grow to large size, and become these kemono things, right, that again would kind of resonate a little bit with the kaiju idea as well. That looks like a Pokemon. Oh yeah, it's really, it's gorgeous looking, right? It's again, it's doing a very nice job of this kind of fantasy Japan, right? You've got torii gates and things like that, and the traditional Japanese architecture, but it's all kind of heightened to another level.
A fine young farming fellow.
The costume seems to be kind of a mishmash of a lot of different elements, right? There's something vaguely continental about this outfit here. Shades of China, Korea. Other characters seem to be kind of dressed in pure creative fantasy mode, and others seem to have very kind of sort of traditional Japanese attire. So again, there's this fantasy element of kind of this eclectic mix of things, like this guy here. That's very colorful. That's a little more colorful than we might have seen. back in feudal Japan? Well, obviously there aren't very many redheads in Japan, natural redheads in Japan. But in kabuki theater, you would have the actors oftentimes wear these bright red wigs to kind of give them a stylized and fierce appearance. Again, it's kind of this mix of traditional Japanese fashion, but with kind of a hyper color scheme that we probably never would have seen actually at the time.
Befalls me?
Yeah, I mean, the makeup is vaguely geisha-esque. The red eyeshadow and the red lipstick reminds me a little bit of a Maiko as an apprentice geisha, but not exactly. Again, everything in here seems to be kind of fantasized to a degree, like that person's sword. That's enormous. That reminds me of Final Fantasy VII, actually, more than anything else. And of course, Final Fantasy VII is another huge part of Japanese culture, So yeah, it seems like they're drawing on a lot of Studio Ghibli ideas. They're drawing on some Final Fantasy ideas. So there's a lot of Japanese pop culture in here as well, it looks like. You know, like the moss-colored stone lanterns and so forth. I mean, that's very evocative of kind of old Japan. I mean, you can go to parks and so forth today in places like Kyoto and see stuff exactly like that. No giant boar demons running around, though.
Possessed.
Probably based off of no theater masks, which in the oldest of the Japanese performing arts, and in the no theater, all the actors always wear a mask that covers their face, and the masks were kind of coded to certain character types. And this certainly seems to be a riff off of that, perhaps, but this does not remind me of any particular no masks. So once again, it seems like they're kind of inspired by traditional Japanese arts and traditional Japanese theater and so forth, but they're giving it a very strong lacquer of fantasy on top of everything. The veiled hats are something that we would certainly have seen, but not quite this shape. So they're having fun with it. I don't think it's bad. I think it's actually really cool. They're clearly not going for historical accuracy. Again, I don't think that was ever the intention here.
I know nothing of the workings of karakuri.
So this is kind of like a steampunk version of feudal Japan. I mean, it reminds me of, again, Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki films, things like Castle in the Sky that kind of have this very evocative steampunk aesthetic. It seems like there's a clear desire here to mesh steampunk and feudal Japanese architecture. It looks really nice. This is Godzilla. This is total Godzilla to me. Nowadays, we associate Japan with giant monsters because of Godzilla and Kaiju, but the idea of giant monsters is very much kind of born out of Godzilla. But the idea that there's something as big as that lumbering around would definitely not have been a thing before the 1950s and Godzilla. I mean, what I haven't seen so far is any sort of really traditional Japanese monsters like yokai, things like kappa or rokubi, the really traditional monsters that have been around for hundreds of years in Japanese folklore and mythology. This really seems to be kind of making up their own thing in terms of the monsters. Yeah, so that's a pretty interesting take on the East Asian dragon, right? Not just Japan, but Korea and China as well. Typical rendition of the dragon, the long, thin body, not kind of the fat Smaug dragons we have in the West, but the face is a little different, right? This is he's kind of got that gnarly, weathered face that all the other monsters had. So we finally do see kind of a traditional monster here, but even he has kind of that modern kind of lacquer of paint on him. They're elemental spirits, they're symbols of good luck often, so they're not the purely malevolent, evil, treasure-hoarding, damsel-devouring dragons that European mythology had. I mean, oftentimes dragons in East Asian folklore mythology are gentle creatures, although this one seems to be kind of pissed off. Well, some of the weapons here are pretty interesting too, right? It's like this karakuri technology. So karakuri means like trick mechanism. Karakuri ningyo or karakuri dolls were a common thing in the Edo period. And that seems to be kind of playing off of that a bit. They seem to be kind of playing on some kind of vaguely Shinto idea of nature and everything being connected. So animals, plants, and so forth. And it's kind of this fusion. Looks like the balance has been restored. Everything's green again. Again, this has reminded me a lot of Miyazaki, Studio Ghibli. To me, this looks very much like the ending of Princess Mononoke, where the land is healed and everything turns green again. The singed trees, growing leaves and flowers again. This is very, very much Mononoke Hime, healing the animals. And this idea that if you can appease the wrath or appease the anger that's the root cause of a lot of this stuff, that the monsters will cease to be monsters. That seems at play here. That's an idea that's very kind of traditional. And the wolves, of course, that's another kind of Mononoke moment. So yeah, I'd say some interesting Japanese historical elements here. Yeah, again, the costumes a little bit more colorful than we would have seen historically, but definitely rooted in kind of traditional East Asian fashions. This looks like Yakul, the animal from Princess Mononoke that the protagonist rides around on. I've seen a lot of Princess Mononoke in this game. Well, that was Wild Hearts, a gorgeous game full of lots of traditional Japanese elements mixed in with a lot of Studio Ghibli flavors and a side of Godzilla for good measure. If you want to see more Gameology videos, check us out on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Michael Crandol, and I'll be back to talk to you some more about some Japanese-themed video games.